to start off with, we're just going to talk about a few sort of modifications and things that you can sometimes do in special seating. And this can apply to cap seating, but it can also apply to all other types of special seating that you do. And I mean, the first one, which I haven't got a sample of today, but I'll draw some pictures if we need to do, is thinking about things like asymmetric seat cushions, because it's quite common that you come up against kids who have got a significant leg length, and what do you do about that? So, I mean, just can anybody tell me? I mean, when you see somebody with a marked asymmetry, left leg way longer than the right leg, I mean, what's the first thing that you would do when you see that in front of you in a child presenting? Anybody? Sorry?
Check hips.
Check hips, yeah, okay. Anybody else? Well, as part of your assessment, when you know they've come into the room and they've said, oh, you know, little Tommy, he's got his left leg's way longer than the right, and oh, he's right. Okay, yeah, okay. Find out what's happening with the hips. Is it something that's as a consequence of surgery, that is an actual bony leg length difference? Is it just to do with his posture? If it's a bony difference because of surgery or some other reason, then clearly you need to accommodate that. And we'll talk about how you might accommodate that. But if it's to do with his posture, the next thing to consider is it mobile? Can you actually correct it? And that's actually a step, and it sounds so obvious, but it's a step which so often gets overlooked, because people will see a problem and people get very carried away with solving the problem. The problem is his left leg's longer than the right leg. We've got to do something about that. Oh, you know, mum's not happy, there's always a big gap there. And, you know, people get very wrapped up with solving that problem without really looking at what the causes are. So I always sort of advise a moment of caution and just to take a step back and try and establish, when you sort of take the person out of the seat, sit them on a plinth, can that be corrected? Is it something else that's happening? Is it something of the consequence of the seat? Is it maybe the way the seat's actually been set up in the first instance? So there's sort of some key things to look at that are very, very important, and you know, you've got to be careful not to get carried away with the moment, as it were. So if you're going to accommodate that leg length discrepancy, the other thing which I think is very important is once you've decided whether there's any degree of mobility or flexibility in there, because if you've got, and I'm going to make up the numbers, we've got 3 inches of leg length discrepancy from left to right that we're measuring there. If there's any degree of mobility, then you may decide you want to accommodate that in the cushion and make an asymmetric cushion, but if there's any degree of mobility, you have to reduce the amount of extension on the cushion relative to the amount of mobility you either have or you hope to have in the future. So there's a little bit of crystal ball work there, because you might say, well, they're currently sitting in a seat which isn't particularly good, and if we get them better supported elsewhere, we might see a bit of correction, and therefore you've got to consider that in the way that you spec up the asymmetry on your cushion. Because if you give them a 3-inch of asymmetry on their seat cushion and you put a big block of foam, which is going to be quite firm foam behind the leg, that leg is never going to come back. So that means that pelvis is never going to derotate, and you're never going to see them coming out level from that. So it's something you've got to sort of go by step, and I would always recommend that no matter what you're measuring, you always, in terms of when you're making a cushion, you always reduce that by at least ½ an inch or maybe even an inch in some cases. The other thing which can throw up some interesting questions with asymmetric seat cushions is if you're using a ramped seat cushion, which obviously on cap seats we do routinely, then where do you start the ramp? Because do you start the ramp at the same point on the left and right, or do you stagger the ramp and make it the same overall length but just move it forward on the one side? What's anybody think about that? What do you do normally? Do you make cushions? I think you kind of hinted that you maybe do asymmetric cushions at the back there.
I haven't personally made it.
You haven't, no? Okay. Don't know.
I need to see them really.
Okay. What does anybody else do asymmetric cushions? No? Okay.
The feet had to be cut away once with a child with it. Yeah.
Right, okay. Cutting away on the one side, yeah. I mean, you can cut away on one side. We normally extend forward on the one side, but it's the same end result.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what we generally recommend, and there's always exceptions, and it can depend on whether there's been some sort of surgical intervention or whether it's a postural reasoning, but we would generally recommend that you keep the ramp length the same on both sides and move it forward on the long side, to stagger it. And one of the reasons for that is just to do with simple geometry, that if you've got a ramp that starts at the same position on the left and right, but the left is longer than the right, that ramp will go up higher, which effectively means that you're not going to be keeping your femurs level relative to the pelvis. So it sort of has a knock-on effect back to the pelvis, that if you've got a higher height of ramp on one side than the other, it'll change your sort of whole orientation of the pelvis. So it's thinking through those processes that's quite an important part of special seating. And likewise, take that a step further. If you're going to have an asymmetric cushion, not only why is it happening, but what else is happening? What's happening at the back support, and do you actually need to be doing something else differently there? Where's your load bearing happening, and is it necessary to introduce some sort of different support at the back of the pelvis as well? So there's no one answer to that. The answer is that sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, but you have to go back to the pelvis and say, what's the effect of this, and is it having some sort of knock-on effect?